Hey everybody, it's Sean and Trey with Reactions to the Classics. Before we get started today, we just wanted to invite you to take a look at our Patreon page where we have all kinds of reward tiers, anywhere from reacting to an entire album to songs, and to support us for as little as $1 a month. It really helps us out.
And you can also check out our Facebook and Discord groups down below. Got a great community of people who love music. And all that to say, y'all, let's get to today's video. What's happening, everybody? Trey here, joined again by my dad, Sean, and today we are up to the Beatles Anthology 2, Part 1. So just like our Anthology 1, we're going to split this up into multiple parts, and I'm excited to get rocking with this and all that talk. Let's just get into the quick facts of this record.
Yeah, it was released about 5 months after Anthology 1. It was released in March of 1996. Sold about half the amount of copies in the first week, but still went to #1, and it goes from the Help sessions up to right before they left for India in February of 1968. And the anthology producer and project leader, just a reminder, was George Martin. Now, we had Free as a Bird leading off Anthology 1. Now we have Real Love heading up Anthology number 2. Another original song. We got all kinds of info on it, but just a reminder, they want to do some original songs. Yoko gave me some demos of John, which I know you're going to get into the quality of that in a minute. They had 4 songs to choose from, and they chose Free as a Bird and Real Love. Real Love was a song that John was working on along with a song called Real Life, so they kind of merged together. They were actually working on a Broadway play back in the late 70s, The Ballad of John and Yoko, and a handwritten ordering of Double Fantasy for John actually had this song leading off side 2. So John probably intended
very interesting
at some point, I know it was released on some of his stuff later on.
Now, George Martin declined to produce this, so they brought in familiar man Jeff Lynne, just as they did with Free as a Bird, and they ran into some issues with the quality of this recording because it was recorded by Lennon on like a handheld cassette tape.
Yes.
And so Lynn was saying it was very difficult because there was a lot of hisses, and the vocal of John itself was really low.
Yeah.
And so he said they had to work over a week to edit out all the dead space. He said Lennon's voice itself was actually preserved and well and good, but it was all the dead space around his words that was just a nightmare to get edited out. I don't envy Lynn for doing that. I imagine in 2020 it would have been much easier.
I was going to say, 25 years later, you could probably do this pretty easily, but man, 1995, not so much. Huh?
But, and that kind of gives the certain vibe to the song whenever we get into that. But there's also another couple unique facts about this tune.
Well, yeah, first off, the atmosphere in the studio, everyone said, was great. They just pretended that John had went out for a tea. So there was great cooperation, which I'm sure they were kind of a little worried. What is this going to be like when you get these 3 guys back together? And then we get to a very weird thing with BBC Radio 1. They did not have this song on their top 60 playlist. Some said it was banned. They said, oh, it's just not on our top 60 playlist. So it wasn't getting played. And Paul actually wrote an 800-word article published in the Daily Mirror just criticizing BBC Radio 1. BBC Radio 1 said, well, look, we're a contemporary station. This is older stuff. Although their sales figures showed that 41% of the buyers of Anthology 1
We're teenagers,
so you can stand to reason Anthology 2 is going to be the same thing. And they had no problem putting Free as a Bird up there. So eventually they put it back into the rotation, but I thought, wow, BBC pushing back against the boys in 96, kind of weird. As far as, I know we're going to get into what this sounds like. We're spending far more time on this song because it has stories behind it and those sorts of things. I thought the vocal was weird to me. John sounds very strange, psychedelic. That part of it, I'm not too sure what I think of it. I like Free as a Bird better for that reason, although I know you may like that part of it.
No, I actually think that's a positive for the tune.
I can see it go both ways.
I mean, with that harmonium in there as well, and just with the like almost distant vocal of Lennon, it made for, I think, a very psychedelic infused type of a Beatles sound in here.
I agree.
You had a Harrison solo as well. I think I lean towards Free as a Bird because Paul and George get some verses in there as well, whereas here it's all Lennon. But
good guitar solo in this thing as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I enjoyed the lyrics to it. Just a note how even from kids we're looking for love, even if we maybe don't know it. And then we're gonna go into Yes It Is, takes 2 and 14, and for the next several tunes, we're just gonna go to various takes of tracks here. And this was interesting because take 2 doesn't have any of those like noted harmonies that Yes It Is has. I think Yes It Is one of the more underrated Beatles tunes that there is, but the transition here is awesome because midway through the song it transitions where it's just John's vocal to then take 14. It's the more familiar with the tri-harmonies in there, so I thought it was great.
I did too. I thought John sounded a little subdued on this, and we'll get to that later on as we kind of go through this. But yeah, thought the harmonies were still fantastic, and how hard did that have to be just to be in there and bust those harmonies out. That's going to bring us to Down, take 1. It was recorded in the same session as yesterday, and I've just seen a face. I recorded the backing track in 7 takes. The first of these is the one we hear with a quiet organ track and no backing vocals. I like it because Paul starts it out in an American accent. Let's hope this turns out pretty darn good, huh? Something
that was hilarious to me. Is the stereotypical kind of American white guy.
It was so funny, man. And he can also be heard repeating the phrase, plastic soul, man, plastic soul. He later said that phrase, which the Beatles later adapted for rubber soul, was what black musicians used to describe Mick Jagger. So I thought it was awfully good for a first take, Trey, right out of the chute.
That's what I wrote down too. The organ gave it a less rock and roll type vibe that we're used to with this song, and it was interesting. My brain was filling in the backing vocals.
Mine was too.
I'm really down. It wasn't there, so it was kind of weird to hear that a song you're familiar with and not have such a defining trait to it. But
that's what we want.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to hear the different things.
And the studio banter was a little cool as well. And then we'll move on to track number 4.
You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. One of my favorite, like, underrated Beatles songs. I actually listened to this song a lot. And this one was an early example of John self-reflecting in his writing. He wrote the song during what he called his Dylan period. Pretty ambiguous lyrics, but he could have been referring to the fact that as a Beatle, he was supposed to keep his married life a secret, or Brian Epstein's sexuality. This is takes 1, 2, and 5. In a montage, the first 2 takes are both broken down. They're followed by a completed alternative version, take 5. On this version, he counts off the song, then stops to readjust his guitar pickup, and he talks about that. And then there's a sound of a glass breaking. And I love the studio chatter. This is one of those fly in the wall that I just wish we had more of. But
exactly, he also calls Paul Macca, which
at the very end, which you ready, Macca?
You know what Paul is known by a lot of Beatles fans. So for the highlight here for me is the studio banter at the start, and I mean the song itself is really good. Not too much different than the final release.
A little less powerful on John's vocals, but that's going to take us to
a Ringo tune, one that's kind of panned by critics and fans alike. If You've Got Trouble. This was going to be Ringo's tune on Help, and
yes, it was.
They ended up not really digging it that much. John and Paul wrote it, and they replaced it with Act Naturally. I'm gonna say that I actually liked this tune.
See, so did I. I read where a couple of publications named it the worst Beatles song ever. I'm like, I actually kind of like this, and I love the part, my boy Ringo, rock on anybody.
No, that stood out to me too. And he has like a double track vocal, which usually, I don't know if there's been another instance where Ringo's had that like in this sort of time period. So gave his vocal a little bit more polish. And so yeah, I actually enjoyed this tune. Rock on, Ringo, one time.
So did I. That's going to take us to another unreleased track. It's take 1 of That Means a Lot. It was originally recorded for the Help film and soundtrack. Paul and John were dissatisfied with it, couldn't get it like they wanted it. This was pretty rough for me. This is way rougher than the previous song for me, and I thought the guitars on here were really a mess, but it is take 1, so it's kind of hard to judge them on that.
Yeah, I actually like some of the lyrics in here. That was more the highlight for me than like you mentioned, the instrumentation being in take 1. It's still ironing out some stuff, and then maybe that's why they were a bit dissatisfied with it.
Yeah, exactly.
And the harmonies, though, I will say on the outro were pretty spot on, and it is cool just to hear a song you've never heard.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Heard before, even if it's not, particularly a standout, but I still thought it was pretty good. And then we're going to move on now
to Yesterday, take 1. It's 13 on the Rolling Stones 500 greatest songs of all time. They only did 2 takes of it. This is the take 1 that wasn't used. It doesn't have the string overdub. And even though Harrison never played on it, it does appear that he's there because his voice is captured on the session tapes. I mean, this is pretty much a standard Yesterday. I think Paul sounds fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Paul sounds fantastic throughout this whole album, I thought.
Yeah, I think it's just cool to hear some studio banter to one of the most famous and recorded songs of all time.
Exactly.
See the master McCartney at work, and that was really the highlight for me. Like you said, it was just not too different, all in all, besides the strings type of deal than the official version. And then we go to "It's Only Love," a song that John himself wasn't a huge fan of.
He was not. This is takes 3 and 2. That's the way it's listed by the way they ordered them on here. Really good vocals, Trey. Thought the guitar was a bit off.
Yeah, I was gonna.
But it's also early on, you know. I mean, I hate to judge these takes
Yeah.
1s and 2. You know, I mean, they're not releasing these things.
I was gonna say it sounded pretty standard to me for the official one. Besides, the guitar was a little bit different.
Yeah, and if it was perfect, then it wouldn't be a take. Right?
Yeah,
so, I mean,
exactly.
I realized that fully.
And it was interesting that they included this since it's not particularly one of the more famous Beatles tunes. But
Yeah.
I like that they choose some of the more underrated tunes to kind of highlight on this. And our next 4 tunes are all going to be live versions from Blackpool Night Out, and the first song from this is "I Feel Fine."
Yeah, and this song was it was the first Beatles song to be released at the same time in the US and UK, went to #1 in both. This show was just a variety show, kind of run-of-the-mill for this time of period for them. We had some of the stuff on the last anthology as well. I thought they sound good here. There's only mainly screaming at the end, but I thought they were pretty spot on this song.
Yeah, here I noticed a bit less energy from John.
I noticed that as well as we kind of finished this thing out.
Yeah, and I mean, he still sounds great. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
he
Lennon, but compared to some of the earlier work, you can tell maybe they're getting a little burnt out, and I could definitely tell that on the next tune as well, "Ticket to Ride," a little bit of a more lack of energy type of thing, and it's tough whenever you're comparing them to the studio version.
And I think the other thing is what I'm thinking, my hypothesis on this for John is John carries such a heavy load early on, right? And songs are very difficult on the voice, very straining. Just, for example, Twist and Shout, but a lot of the covers he chose were very straining, and so he's over here having to carry it, and I'm wondering if he's just wearing out both physically and with the voice and energy-wise. And they're talking to the crowd, and I just love that. We're going to get that in the next several songs. That's the kind of stuff we signed up for on this. Just a reminder, the song's 394 on Rolling Stone's Top 500 Songs of All Time. If you want to know what it's about, go back and watch our review of the album. But I thought it was a good job, like you said, the energy, but it's cool to hear them performing live.
Yeah, and then that moves us to yesterday, and here's where the fun stuff really happens, because you have at the start George introducing Paul, saying, for Paul McCartney, opportunity knocks, and then Paul knocks out an unbelievable live version of Yesterday, and then at the end John comes in and he says something along the lines like, "Thank you, Ringo, that was wonderful," just to kind of lighten the mood a little bit. And
because this song was highly controversial when it was laid down in the studio, because no one was on it except for Paul, and they had even considered it, they being Martin and Epstein, releasing it as Paul McCartney on his own, and the band's like, no, we don't want to do that, it's all us. But so I wondered how that kind of worked live. I mean, it's going to remind you of that situation
that's a good
every
point.
time it's played. So yeah, I thought that was a good sarcasm in there. And that's going to take us to the final song played on this show, "Help." 29 on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Songs of All Time. But one of the cool parts at the beginning, John says it's the latest record or latest electronic noise, depending on whose side you're on. I don't think his voice sounded great here either. It's still good. I mean, it's the Beatles. John wrote this song as kind of a cry out for help because of all the stress and everything that was hitting them at the time.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I just thought it was a solid performance of Help. And then we're going to move on to the famous Shea Stadium. We only got one tune from that, and they pick it from my man George here.
They do.
We got Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby. Of course, George was a huge Carl Perkins fan.
Yes.
And here you can really it's different since obviously the crowd is so distant and far away.
Yeah.
The acoustics kind of pick that up. You can tell that they're going nuts and crazy, but if you've seen the footage, they're in the middle of the freaking field.
Yeah,
and then,
they're way out there. Yeah, exactly.
I thought it was a bit sloppy at certain points, but I mean, what could you expect in the environment? Like,
I think this recording this was a nightmare
Yeah.
for him, I'm sure, because at points the music itself, the instrumentation overwhelms the vocals, and you can hardly hear George. I thought their instrumentation was pretty darn good considering all the things they were dealing with.
And then we're going to move on to one. There's not a lot of rubber soul material here, which is kind of disappointing. But we do have take one of Norwegian Wood, This Bird Has Flown, which This Bird Has Flown is what it was initially called on this take. And they busted this out into a more emphasis on the sitar and the drone-like quality here. They also laid down the 12-string acoustic, had cymbals in here, and it's also interesting because in only certain parts of the verses is Lennon's voice double track, so I also thought that added a little bit of a psychedelic nature to it, and the drone is definitely more a little bit manic and not as subdued as the official version.
Yeah, I really like the vocal performance. I actually really like this song.
Oh, me too.
I think it was excellent. Now, the sound of the sitar proved difficult to capture. According to sound engineer Norman Smith, they said there's a lot of nasty peaks in a very complex waveform. George declined to use a limiter, which would have fixed the problem with distortion, but would have affected the sound. And the band was dissatisfied with this, obviously, and they shelved it and went back to it way later in the session.
Yeah, and I thought this was my favorite up to this point, just because it did have some things you could pinpoint as being noticeably different than the version that we're all familiar with.
Yeah, and I think now, obviously, on Rubber Soul, we're going through more, we're going to, for the rest of this journey, go through more complex songs, so you really can notice a difference. And we're going to finish off this part one with take one of I'm Looking Through You, which is, I really enjoy this song. It's a favorite of mine.
Yeah, me too. I'm glad that even though there wasn't a lot of Rubber Soul material on here, they chose two fantastic tunes. And this was at a noticeably different beat. It was at 132 beats per minute. So it's slower, gave it a little bit more of a dreamier, kind of spaced out, chilled vibe to it. So again, I enjoyed this one.
I did as well. And that's going to wrap up part one, Trey. We still got two more parts of Anthology 2. Very much looking forward to. We're about to get into the highly, highly acclaimed period, although so far all this is highly acclaimed to me, but really enjoyed it.
Oh, absolutely, and let us know what you think of Anthology 2 in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, be sure to give a big thumbs up, hit that big red subscribe button, and until next time, y'all, thank you so much for watching. Happy listening, and we will see ya.